Well, hello everyone. We are so glad that you are here. If we haven't met before, my name is Carolyn Arends. I'm Renovari's Director of Education, and it is my deep joy to welcome you to this webinar. This one is called Creating Safe Spaces to Have Honest Conversations About Race. In just a minute, I'll introduce you to our panelists, but just in case this is your first time to a Renovari webinar, I want to walk you through what's going to happen. Many of you, when you registered, you submitted excellent questions for this webinar, so we're going to work through as many of those as we can over the next hour, and then at the top of the hour, when we've been going for 60 minutes, we'll take a look at some questions that have been submitted live during the webinar. So while we're talking, if something bubbles up for you that you'd like to ask, please go ahead and use the Q&A link to submit your question, and we'll get to some of those in about an hour. You are also welcome to chat with each other using the chat link. It's fun when you can kind of tell each other where you're from and what you're thinking. We won't see any questions in the chat link, so don't put your questions for the panelists there, but certainly feel free to talk to each other using the chat function. I also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and so in a day or two you'll get emailed a link from us if you want to watch it again, or if you find that you have to leave early, or if we mention something and you don't quite catch it. We'll also, when we post that archived webinar, we'll post links to any books or resources or things that we mention. Okay, hopefully all of that makes sense. Again, we're really glad you're here, and I'm really excited to introduce you to our panelists. First up is Tina Dyer. Tina has 32 years of experience in the financial services industry in a variety of leadership roles. Hey, Tina. She is currently serving as a senior learning and development consultant and vice president in corporate human resources at a Fortune 50 company. You have to take a deep breath before you say that. Tina also has a master's degree in Christian spiritual formation and leadership from Friends University. And here is what I feel is the most important thing to know. She is an alumni of the Renovari Institute, where she was a brilliant student in every way except for her propensity to beat me in Scrabble. I take issue with that. But other than that, she was a fabulous student. And recently, she helped us do, with a current cohort of the Renovari Institute, she helped us do circles of trust exercise virtually together, helping us process our own narratives around race, racial justice, our own histories, and it was so helpful. And that's where the genesis for this webinar came from. So, Tina, thank you for being with us. We're so glad you said yes.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Also with us is Nathan Foster. I know lots of you know Nate. Nate is our Director of Community Life here at Renovari. Before he came here full time, he was serving as the Andrews Chair in Spiritual Formation at Spring Arbor University. And he did teach a class on race and diversity to would-be social workers there. So had some chances to think formally about this subject, has thought about it in lots of other contexts too, and is always such a valuable conversation partner. We're glad you're here, Nate. Can you unmute and say hello? Oh, wait, it's fighting you. Unmute again. There we go.
Hi.
Hi. So glad you're here. Well, let's dive in. We thought we were talking together before we began, and we were thinking maybe we should define a couple terms in our title. So our title is Creating Safe Spaces to Have Honest Conversations About Race. Now, we realized quite far into the process that there was a typo in our graphic. It actually said creating safe spaces to have honest conversions around race, which we think was maybe just a Freudian theological slip. It was actually probably more true than we knew. But yeah, I'm seeing in the chat that some people were like, yeah, that's what it should be called. But anyway, conversations or conversions around race are tricky. And so we want to define a couple terms. First of all, even some of our pre-submitted questions from Pamela and Sharon were getting at, what do we mean by the term race? So maybe I could throw that to you first, Tina. What do you mean when you use the term race?
Oh, thanks, Carolyn. And I do want to say this. One thing is, since I graduated from the Institute, Carolyn and I have been playing Words and Friends, or we did for our season, and she beat me every single time. So I just prefer the in-person to the technology.
It's just easier for me to cheat on Words with Friends than it is playing Scrabble in person. Anyway, as you were.
Okay, back to the topic at hand. It is important to define the terms, because I note when you ask people, if you ask 100 people, you get 100 different responses. And when we're having conversations about race, if we're not all operating with that same definition, it really does trigger a lot of emotional reactions and just a lot to manage. So when I talk about race, I'm real clear that I'm talking about race as a social construct. I'm talking about, like, this is a really good year to think about that. You're going to take the census, and on the census, it's going to ask you to check a box identifying your race. And what's the purpose of that census? The purpose of that census is to count people, to categorize them, to make determinations about allocating government resources and how they will be distributed, and how we have representation. So it's the social construct of race. When we think about ethnicity and culture, then we're talking about where people, the nation that they're a part of, and the traditions and the shared experiences that they have from growing together in a certain place with a certain language, with traditions. And so today when we're talking, I'm focused around the social construct of race and all of its implications. That's where I'd start.
What would you add to that, Nate, or what's your thinking?
Yeah, I'd work with that too. I mean, thinking of race as biological differences, skin color, hair, whatnot, that have no real meaning biologically, but socially we prescribe meaning to it, as Tina's saying, a social construct. I like to make, it's helpful for me to catch a distinction between race and culture, because while race doesn't necessarily have, or it has no meaning biologically, socially it means everything, but it may not, but someone's culture is as well potentially has a lot of meaning in terms of people's shared experiences, their values, their norms. And, you know, some folks will be a part of a race, but not a part of the culture. Some folks may not, and it, you know, it goes back and forth. But so I think, hearing people's experiences and how they self-identify helps to understand where people are coming from. But yes, I'd echo that. There's a social construct that we've prescribed meaning to as a society.
Okay, thank you. Getting clarity around our terms. Maybe the second term.
Tina, were you going to respond?
Oh, sorry.
Did you have a...
You know, I had a thought. So I think that's why you might experience people having different reactions. So from my lens, when you see people protesting, what they're talking about is the social construct of race and how that's having an impact on people's lives. It's not about being against a particular group of people. It's talking about, that's the lens which I see that.
Great, thank you. Okay, so one other set of definitions. What do we mean when we talk about safe spaces? What makes a safe, it's a tongue twister. What makes a space safe or not safe? And maybe I'll ask Nate first to dive in on this one and then see what Tina thinks.
Yeah, it's good to define that, isn't it? I mean, I would think of a safe space as a space where people come with some humility. They come to listen, not run an agenda. I think respect would come to mind. Humility. I think a sort of kindness, yet an honesty. Not perpetuating trauma would be maybe a base level. What do you think, Tina?
Thanks.
I think all those things are true. And I think it's also important to not associate safe with comfort. So to engage in a conversation around race is uncomfortable, can be awkward, and requires energy. And so if there's this expectation that I am entitled to not experience those things in a conversation around race, that can really meet with a lot of defensiveness when it's a natural part of having a conversation around race for our bodies to have reactions that we might not even be aware of, and there be a lot of emotion. And so the natural response when we might encounter some of that is to run for safety, which means to withdraw, shut down. And in order to have a conversation around race, we all need to figure out, how can I stay engaged? So how do I navigate that? So so for me, breathing is really important, deep breathing, and being real clear about what my intention is when I enter into the conversation. So like today, this is, and this, sometimes people think maybe a conversation around race is easier for people who are not a part of the, you know, white culture or dominant group, or however that might play out depending on who your audience is. And it's not true. It's not any more comfortable for me. So I have to think about the strategies of how I'm going to care for myself when I might feel, I might notice my body having a reaction. And so like anything else, the more you do it, the stronger the muscle is and the greater capacity you have to navigate different spaces. So think about in our culture how often we do or don't talk about this. So if this is like your first conversation into it, you might feel a lot of things and that might feel really out of control. But if you've done it for, you know, the millionth time, even though all those same things might be there, you just got a little more muscle strength. So I think that's a part of honoring the space, being clear about their intention. Oh, so going back to that. So like for today, I had to get clear about what's my intention. My intention was to be open to my friends, to be authentic and care for myself, and to maybe extend some invitations. And you know what's the nice thing about an invitation is you know, you don't RSVP to every invitation that you get. So right, you get to choose. So you know, that's my intention for being in this space, and that's going to take care of me as we navigate through the conversation wherever we might go.
That's really helpful. I noticed, Tina, when you led some of us in the Renovari Institute, this thing of attending to our body, you were constantly bringing us back to that, breathing exercises, paying attention to the feeling in our stomach, and all that kind of thing. Is that something that's going on for you even in a one-on-one conversation? Are you aware, and I'm curious about this for you too, Nate, how aware you are of your body? Like when you say, I've got to take care of, I want to be open to my friends and take care of myself. Is some of that, are you aware of your breathing the whole time? Can you let us in a little bit? I mean, maybe it's already on autopilot for you, but if you were coaching someone, how would you coach them to attend to their body in terms of taking care of themselves in the conversation?
That's an interesting question because, you know, I think about, you know, I've been breathing all my life, so I'm very, you know, I do it, right? But it wasn't until I was training to participate in a marathon that I learned that I've been breathing wrong all my life. So you can't do something that's automatic and it be like so wrong and not serve you. But it has been part of a practice or a discipline about paying attention over a long, long time, so that I can notice. So it's what that trainer did for me is help to make something that was invisible or unknown to me visible. And I think that's what this, you know, this is what all of our practices are about, right? Becoming aware of them, and then having these invitations to notice, and then doing some type of practice to train until it becomes something that is more of a default setting rather than, you know, a scary venture or less scary venture. I don't know if you ever, you know, get to
Whatever,
that.
just totally not scary. Yeah. How about for you, Nate? Are you very aware of your body in these kinds of contexts?
No.
No.
No, and maybe I should be. I do echo, you know, Tina's statement about being comfortable. Um, it is uncomfortable, and part of it is that sometimes I learn things that I don't want to be true, or I learn things about
Mm.
myself that make me uncomfortable, and so sticking with it. I like the breathing thing. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That, so that's part of safe being in the conversation. So here, I say from my perspective, what can make the conversation unsafe for me is when people come into the conversation and they expect closure. They expect a resolution.
Mm.
They expect an answer, technical and, you know, and they're after it. And that can, so the idea that we all understand that we're talking about something that's, you know, 400 years in the making, living, experiencing, we are not going to have an hour meeting, 2-day workshop, and experience nirvana, and then we're never to visit this again. That's not realistic. And so just not having that pressure. And then the other part is that there needs to be the shared vulnerability. So, you know, not this idea that I'm going to go in, observe, look, and, you know, kind of be a voyeur into your life, but that I'm actually willing to be vulnerable, and it's this shared vulnerability, and we're going to engage together. And so those are the things that make it safe for me to participate in that type of conversation.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I was trying to find the question. Another Sharon, who also is an RI alum, had asked, "Do we always need a safe or brave space in order to have a conversation about race?" And I don't want to read too much into her question. I don't know if she means like, do the conditions have to be just right, or I'm just curious what that if that question provokes a response from either of you.
What do you think, Nate?
I mean, the word that caught me was brave. Like, does it
Mm,
have to? You know, I mean, I don't think it always has to be really. You know, there can be a casualness to it. At least that's been, you know, my experience. It doesn't have to be this kind of, you know, big come to Jesus kind of moment. In terms of safe, I mean, I think that I don't want to cause damage from my conversation. So in that
yeah.
sense, yes, like I don't want to do harm for folks. In terms of kind of for me, um, that doesn't mean I'm not going to walk away with things to think about or things that kind of rise up that I need to, you know, kind of work with. And I like that what Tina's saying about, you know, you know, tend to yourself and what's coming up with it. I don't know that I have an answer for it. I wouldn't say the kind of absolute, other than I don't think we should be making it unsafe for other people.
Yeah.
And if yeah.
Yeah. How
I
about you,
think
Tina?
I think that it's probably a unique answer about, you know, um, do I have to be brave? I think it takes some sort of courage, and depending on where you are. But I am wondering, what's the level of relationship between the people having the conversation?
Mm,
And I think to um, Nathan's point, you know, if there's a deep relationship, a lot of trust, it doesn't feel very weighty. It's just something else we talk about. But if we have no relationship and you want to have a deep conversation, I could see how that would be very jarring and the potential to do a lot of harm.
yeah. That's really helpful. What is the level of trust? What is the level of relationship? And probably probably the conversation can only go as deep as the level of trust and the level of relationship. So I think for me, in the skin I'm in, I always have this fear of saying the horribly wrong thing, or like Nate was saying earlier, like traumatizing a friend of color inadvertently by saying something that, I not knowing what I don't know. And so what I really appreciate is this distinction between that safe doesn't mean comfortable. It does mean some risk and working things through and apologizing if you say the wrong thing and learning, right? So yeah, I'm going to hold on to that creating a safe space doesn't mean creating a risk-free or comfortable space, but it's a space where you're for each other and with each other. Yeah, hopefully. Okay, well, let's move into some more of these submitted questions. I grouped the first bunch here under the category inner work, because I know from hearing Tina teach on this in the past, or she says a lot of it is about your own inner work that you bring to the conversation. And I know enough about the way Nate thinks to know he's going to resonate with this too. So we've already touched on this a little bit, but let's see if we can go deeper. Sue asks, how can you prepare yourself to be a safe person to talk about race calmly and as a good listener? So we've already touched on this, but is there more that we can say?
Definitely, there's more that we can say. I think where I'm struggling is, these are always unique conversations. So it would, the question would be back to the person. So, where are you in your journey? What's your experience been? For some people that I've worked with, so much of this is out of their awareness. So the issue is invisible to them. So the very first thing the work that they have to do is they have to begin to be able to see the issue. And that often means learning about things that you don't know anything about, or you haven't, we could talk about how it is that you can grow up in this context and be 40, 50, 60 years old and have never entered into a conversation or had any awareness about the experiences of others. That's an interesting narrative. And so to explore that is really helpful. And a lot of times that starts with learning history and having some context around that before we can have a conversation with someone else who's been living the history, because that can feel really burdensome for someone to need to be educated on the history. So I'll start, that's a starting place.
It's a good one. Yeah. What pops into your mind, Nate?
Self-awareness, checking in. The other piece is not coming with an entitlement that you owe me your experience or you owe me education. That comes to mind. I also think, and maybe I'll just ask the two of you, as we're talking, I'm thinking, wait, this isn't just conversations with folks from different races. I had a wonderful conversation with an Uber driver and I wasn't self-aware and I got really angry, right? And so there's, this stuff plays itself out in a lot of different ways. Self-awareness to me is a big one, and just having some kind of patience and listening. And I like what Tina's saying about, kind of a mutual vulnerability, that there's a coming with an openness.
It makes me think there's another one of our RI students who is African American in a church that I don't know what the demographics are, but there's a good number of African American folks and a good number of white folks. And what my friend said to me is, we told the white people, get in your groups and learn and then come back. Like, we don't even want to be in your groups right now. Not like a segregation thing, but like, we know this history and some of y'all don't. So go teach each other and learn, and then let's have a conversation. And I think I'm maybe hearing a little bit of that in what you're saying, Tina. Am I importing something in? But like, yeah, like just do some research and stuff, and then we can talk. Is that fair? At least on this issue.
Yeah, that's fair. I had a colleague who had not done a lot of work, but we have a relationship. And so she said, "Hey, Tina, I heard someone say," this woman asked, "What can I do to help?" And she said, "Google it." And she says, "I didn't think that was helpful." And she said, "You know, I appreciate you were willing to talk to me." And I responded candidly. If we didn't have a relationship, that would have been my response. She didn't know the person. And so that's very taxing. But I like what you said, Nate, about this isn't so foreign, right? I mean, there are lots of things that we didn't know that we now know because we took some sort of interest. And so I'll just share like a personal example. I had an experience of feeling invisible because of my race. And I was really frustrated about it. And so when I get really frustrated, I often talk to Jesus very candidly about things I don't like. I didn't appreciate being ignored when I went to the store. I didn't appreciate the woman running me, hitting me with her cart as if like I am invisible. And this is how our relationship goes. He listened to what my lament, my pouting, and whining about that. And then in this very gentle way, this question came to mind: "Daughter, who's invisible to you?"
Mm.
And I thought, that's a good question. And immediately I had this image. It was the street that I had driven down earlier the day. And it were the people without shelter that were on the street. It's like, those are my image bearers. And so I began this practice that I am required to see them wherever I am. And so this little thing I did is when I saw a homeless person, I would say, somebody without shelter, I would say, there's one of your image bearers. And it was, so this has been like 5 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. And the other day I was taking a corner, turning somewhere, and it kind of happened automatically, like without me thinking, oh, I need to. And I thought, oh, I've made some progress. I mean, that's like 4 years of paying attention, making something that's invisible, visible. So it's like we approach everything in our relationship, right, with the Lord.
So helpful. And it shows us how much this is a formation issue, how much it's a part of our formation, how we see each other, how we love each other, how we hear each other. I'm going to keep pressing on these kinds of questions in case it pushes other things out. Matthew asks, he says, we all have bias. How would you suggest a person gets their mindset and heart in a position of listening neutrality? So let me ask first, is that the goal, listening neutrality? What does that spark for you guys?
I'm going to keep this one to the professor.
Don't do that, Tina. All right, it reminds me of a quote that I wrote down, and I wanted to share it because it's one of my favorite quotes, and it's attributed to Herbert Spencer. There's a principle which is bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man or woman in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. And so give me the original question, Carolyn, and I'll tie that in.
The original question is, we all have bias. How would you suggest a person gets their mindset and heart in a position of listening neutrality?
That one is I've been working with that quote for years, and it's almost has this, like, I'll say it to myself in context of contempt prior to investigation, like, knock it off. Like, sure, your opinion matters, but not really. Like, and to put myself in a posture of kind of listening and learning. And so then I think that, yeah, if you enter a conversation, being willing to look at our bias, being willing to go there, I think is helpful.
Yeah. couple people are saying it's hard to hear you, Nate. Do you have any volume controls on your end? Monty might be able to turn you up too.
I've got all these knobs.
He has so much listening neutrality that we can't hear him.
Did that get louder? No.
I think maybe just try be aware of speaking loudly into the microphone.
You got it.
Anything else come to mind for you, Tina?
No, question one more time. I'm sorry. It was so I'm still digesting that quote.
It's a good one. Contempt
do you
before
like it?
investigation.
Isn't it a good one?
That's a good one.
I find it helpful, like in my marriage or in any kind of situation, just to,
Okay.
Yeah. So the question was, how do I won't paraphrase it. I'll read it to you again because I don't want to put my own bias into it. Matthew says, we all have bias. How would you suggest a person gets their mindset and heart in a position of listening neutrality?
Okay. So our bias is, how we're able to, shortcut for navigating life is how I think about that. And so that's helping me much of the time. But when I'm taking that shortcut instead of that slowing down in order to notice and be present in the moment, then I rely on my, those automatic responses. So, we lean on, our friend Dallas Willard, right? That ruthlessly eliminating hurry. Because we don't notice things when we're moving fast. And then the act of being intentionally present helps us to see things that we're going to miss. I think the challenge is I want to be able to have that capacity to do those things while I maintain this pace and accomplish goals and check marks, and I have this expectation that the two can work together, and I'm not convinced that they can. I'm not convinced.
Eliminating hurry, both in how we conduct our lives, but even mentally in a conversation, eliminating hurry. And because I think we have a tendency, if somebody says one thing, we then import 10 other things we think go with that thing, right? And instead just hearing the thing that they said is a big challenge.
So here's one way experimented with that. So part of what we've been doing at work are listening circles for employees that are located in Minnesota, at the heart of where George Floyd murder happened. And what we did is got people were put together in really small groups. They had 4 minutes to talk, and it was followed by 30 seconds of silence. And we've done many of them. The number one thing everyone says was the best part of that experience was the silence, which of course this community would all cheer and know, right? But in, a place where multitasking is exalted and I'm too busy to even talk to you, it's been a real gift. And what people said is that in the silence, it was so refreshing to speak and not have someone insert question or interrogate them. And in the silence, people were invited to pay attention to yourself. And then instead of, the other person, and that raised awareness for them. And it's a divine kind of math, because there's no reason that 90 minutes and 8 minutes and 1 minute of silence should transform somebody's life or empower them to do something. But it's had a really significant impact for people. And that mathematically that doesn't make sense, but it's the soul getting space to breathe.
So good. And that was part of the initial reason why we thought of the two of you together for this conversation, because you both have been very intentional about facilitating listening communities. You, Tina, in your work in human resources, and Nate in the Fellowship of the Burning Heart, and what a role silence plays, and someone being heard and then just holding what they've said without any need to comment further, which is like revolutionary. Both of you have built those kind of communities, so there's something really important there. Nate, people are asking for you to read the contempt without investigation quote one more time directly into the microphone. Can you do that for us?
Gladly. Okay, so this is attributed to Herbert Spencer. There's a principle which is bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man or woman in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. So you win. You can always win your argument if you approach things with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that loud enough? Can people hear me?
I think it's better. Yeah. Thank you. Thank
I
you.
think I needed that quote from like the age of 2 or something, you know. The whole thing could have been different.
But there is something, I love what you're saying about silence, Tina. There is something that, I mean, usually the things, knee-jerk reactionary statements or questions, or they're not our finest, reactions. And taking just a breath and taking a step back, particularly if emotions are kind of starting to flare. I used to do when I would teach the course, and we'd go there. I mean, we would have very, very intense conversations, and I would use it's an old thing. I think people would use it in youth group, but like a talking stick. And you can't talk unless you're holding the stick, and you hold it until you're done, and then you put it in the center, and then someone walks up and gets it. And that gives this little pause of intentionality for what you're saying rather than just reacting.
And Nate, can you tell us, and so where does the tradition of the talking stick come from? Do you...
I was thinking it was native, but I'm not sure. Do you know?
That's what I believe too, but I don't know for certain. But what I found interesting in what you shared is if we think about this context of race and what's happening in the world right now, right? We have this displacement of Native people and their customs and traditions disregarded as, I don't know, all the labels to describe them. And so we're all sitting on their land, wherever we are, that they were dispossessed from, with all of what's happening in the world with, everything being different, temperature-wise, or the resources depleted. And we find ourselves turning toward traditions from people who were here originally. I find that fascinating.
Kind of want to give that 30 seconds of silence. It's not general webinar protocol, but it's good. It's really good. Let's just go a little even further with this kind of inner work. And Nancy said, if we are uncomfortable with potential conflict, what spiritual practices can help us attend better to another? So I think we've already touched on silence, a talking stick practice. Are there other things, either corporately or individually? Are there ways we can maybe train instead of try, using the principle of indirection? Are there other things we can do if we're kind of scared of conflict to help us attend better to each other? Anything else come to mind?
I mean, it's generic of sorts, but really helpful with any conversation is approach it in a prayerful spirit, and to kind of, for me, it'll kind of keep this dialogue going, and I'll kind of, what's that about? Just kind of listening. And I mean, that's not that hard. It doesn't have to be that hard, I don't think. And a lot of us are conflict averse, and that's very, American culture in a sense. Isn't necessarily helpful. And being willing to push through conflict, being willing to reach a resolution, even if it sits with the mystery, and it's not tidy. Kind of, I liked what you were saying earlier, Tina, about it. It's not really resolved, but being able to push through relationally to resolve things. I think so much of, I mean, we're talking a lot about, we're talking in the abstract, but so much of this is relational, and that, I think, so, healing is having relationships, people that you, differences that you genuinely care about. It changes everything. You can't dehumanize people. You can't talk in the abstract. And I don't know why I got going on relationships, but there you have it.
I'm tracking with what you're sharing, and I would also ask, what's the source of the fear? What are the narratives that are driving the fear? And when I think specifically around race, one of the activities that I've been recently introduced to and working through myself is completing your racial autobiography, right? So what are the starting with what's my first awareness of it, but then what are the experiences and stories that I have that are actually maybe not in my awareness, but are actually driving how I feel. And because there's a reason people are afraid to enter into conversations around race. And that reason may not be the same for each of us, but that willing. So to me, these are the perfect conversations, just as I gave in that one example, to take to Jesus. To say, I don't get this. Where does this come from? And I've just not had the experience of where he said, I wasn't aware of that. And it was about someone else. It's always an invitation for me to learn something that I had no idea about. And it isn't necessarily going to be immediate. Like, it may be an unfolding or just sitting with something for a period of time.
That's good. So a couple things. One, it sounds like in every dialogue, there's 3 conversations going on, right? The conversation, you're trying to attend to the other person. You're trying to attend to your own responses to the other person and be aware of where you're being triggered or where you're having what might be autonomic responses that aren't that helpful, and intercepting those, and then listening to the Holy Spirit. So there's that, everything's kind of in 3D. You have what the Spirit's saying, what your own reactions are, and trying to attend well to the other person. So there's a lot. And then Tina, if we can chase a little further this idea of doing your own racial autobiography, could you coach us a little bit on what that might look like? If I said, okay, for the next 6 months, my project is going to be to do my own racial autobiography, what would that look like?
So this is not, this comes from Courageous Conversations Around Race, Glenn Singleton. And it's the idea of, you have your own racial awareness timeline, and it begins with your first awareness of race, usually some childhood experience. And the other bookend is your most recent racial encounter. And then it's taking a process of looking at your family of origin, race makeup, your early elementary school experience, high school, college, places you've lived. But the idea is to, I would say, invite you to, I'm approaching it as a practice to sit in conversation, because, memories come up, and then you can journal and talk to the Lord about that. And then when you're maybe done doing that inventory and writing that out, the recommendations, you write it out, then you create like a timeline of maybe the significant points. And, it's just, again, the goal is to enter into these conversations with someone of a racial difference. You need to have your own narrative and understanding of your racial experience. That's what makes for a safe cross-race conversation. Prior to having an understanding and being comfortable talking about your own identity, some of those intra-racial conversations are going to be most helpful, so that you can get comfortable and practice and be able to just share openly without feeling like you have to get it right.
Yeah. Is there yeah, that's great. Is there, you mentioned Sinclair? Sorry,
Uh,
who's,
Glenn Singleton.
Glenn Singleton. Okay, so that's maybe a resource we could point people to when we post the archive.
Um,
Maybe
yes,
with
he's
a,
yeah, he's focused around education. So,
okay,
I you know, I read Looking for Jesus and what he's saying to me, and so you might read and go, I didn't give a why she thought this was great. So, but he has a protocol that I find has been one of the most helpful tools I found about helping people enter into this conversation and understanding how to do that. So, yeah, great
that's
resource.
great. Yeah, maybe if I can share with people who are watching, one thing you had us do when we did an exercise together with the Institute recently is just go into small groups and each share our kind of earliest awareness of race, of like the first time we were aware, oh, wait, I'm a part of a different social construct than you are, sort of thing. And then hold that for, do that practice of each of us in a small group would share that and then just hold that together for about 30 seconds just to start to give people some ideas if they want to do some work in their communities. It was a powerful experience. How about for you, Nate? Anything else in these? I think you answered the question, but anything else around disciplines, ways we can train for conflict, be ready for conflict, or
It's somewhat related, but different to what Tina was saying. I found it really helpful personally, and for others, to do a kind of racial autobiography. And the question, particularly for white folks, what were you before you were white? You know,
mm,
and learning about your own heritage um, helps cultivate empathy and respect for others. And then another practice related to culture, a cultural inventory. What are the values of my culture? When you're living as the dominant culture, you don't see it. And
yeah,
one way to think of it is if you you know went and lived in another country for 10 years, fully immersed, what would you miss after 10 years? What would be difficult for you? That then helps reveal some of the kind of cultural values. But I've found doing that helps develop an appreciation. Whereas for a lot of folks, they don't want to see race, and they don't want to see, I just want to love everybody and be colorblind or whatnot, which isn't necessarily helpful because it's speaking to people's experiences and their life, our life. And so I found both those practices to be helpful and actually kind of fun. People will usually in America, we just have most people have no connection to their ancestry, and digging in a little bit, it's helpful. It's helpful.
that's great. What you just said there, Nate, reminds me of a submitted question. I don't know where it is on my pages, so I can't say who asked it. But somebody said, "Well, if we're all one in Christ, why do we even have to talk about ethnicity or race?" Can you speak to that? Like, is the idea of being colorblind helpful?
No, it's offensive. Like I mean, I get the heart behind it, the heart of I want to love everybody. I don't judge you, I accept you, I get that. But you are missing a huge part of a person's life if you're ignoring that. And I think a lot of times we ignore it because it makes us uncomfortable. But to realize that shapes it based on where you live, country you live, and what's the dominant culture, that shapes your experiences from a very young age. In terms of access to resources, and even just what is possible for people that look like me in this particular location and time. So I mean, I get the heart behind it, but I don't think I think it's destructive, actually.
Not
I don't
helpful.
know. Tina, you have thoughts?
Uh, yeah, I wholeheartedly. So it is destructive, and maybe if we trade color blind for color brave, I think that's Melanie Hobson. She did a TED talk with that language. But for me, it's, I mean, what if you couldn't see the color on flowers? I mean, we would never say, I mean, I've never seen an ugly flower. I mean, there's some I'm drawn to more than others, but the fact that we don't see the variety and complexity of people as a part of God's creative expression is strange to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that alone tells you that race is an issue. The fact that we don't want to see it is because there's a negative association that we have with it. And it's really a way to say, I don't want to see it. I want to stay in the place where it doesn't exist, and which is really letting you know that person is, there's probably a lot of pain there that they're not ready to face.
Someone in the chat, I'm not supposed to be watching the chat, but it pops up and catches my eye occasionally. And someone said, how about color rich? And that's a nice response. Were you going to say something else?
Well, just part of what I'm hearing you say, Tina, that just I think is worth saying, acknowledging that we can celebrate these things and we learn from each other, and people's different experiences, whether it be racial or cultural, we have a lot to learn. And there's a richness there. And I don't mean to be, I don't want to overplay that, but this isn't just about, we add value to each other's lives when we hear each other's stories and values.
Yeah.
Now I am gonna go on a little tangent here.
Oh, good. Go.
Because color is a big deal, and it's a big deal globally. So we have this issue even when we talk about anti-race, right? That we have in our construct, but throughout the world there is this issue of colorism, which means that even when we have ranges of people, we create social hierarchies, based on color. And so those that are of whoever's closest to the color of white are the most privileged and admired in that group. And those that are with darkest skin are the least, and this is a global thing across cultures. So this idea of valuing people differently based on skin color is huge. And so that's another reason that being colorblind is so dangerous, and it's really awful. So India, all across Africa, in Latin countries, in Asian countries, it is a problem.
In that color blindness becomes blindness to injustice, right? Yeah.
Right, and the reality that those that are closest to whiteness will get more privileges and have more opportunities. And you see this by, who's portrayed on television, who's shown as beautiful, who gets the opportunity. So then we are creating that this is the standard of beauty acceptable, and if you don't meet that, so we've marketed that reality across the globe, and it is causing damage.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about it as a kind of global phenomenon. What do you think some of the roots are behind that?
I don't have a prepared answer, so my succinct best I can come up with is white supremacist ideology that has infiltrated all the ways that we define what is good and beautiful and best.
I think I'm not a panelist, but if I can say quickly that, sometimes I'll hear fellow Christians saying racism is wrong, racism is evil. Of course, I'm against racism. But I don't believe white supremacy is a thing, or I don't believe that there's systemic racism. And that's where people in my skin have the most work to do to understand how, and I'm just beginning to unravel this for me, how much we just see ourselves at the center without realizing that we do. And so we'll say, as simple as there's all kinds of people of other ethnic groups in my neighborhood. Why don't they come to my church? I want them to come to my church, but none of them are on my platform. We're not eating any of their food, like always seeing ourselves as the host is something Willie Jennings helped me with. So I just want to say to folks out there, you could be a person who would never in a million years say something racist about someone. You would think that that was evil, but there may still be deep work to do in terms of our unassumed thing or unexamined assumptions. And like you're saying, Tina, what gets to what a Christian looks like, what a beautiful person looks like, what a leader looks like, all of those things, so much work to do around the things that we just take for granted and don't realize that we're taking for granted. Okay, that's my 2 cents because it's my personal project at this time. In 5 minutes, I need to ask, we're getting some great live questions, but I want to work through a few. We had so many great ones here. Apologies to everyone who we didn't get to your question. Here's one from Andre. He says, I have faced racism more times than I can remember, but never engaged in a conversation on race. Can conversations bring change? So in your experience, can conversations bring change? Is there hope?
Yeah, absolutely. There's hope. And I say that because I've experienced the hope of Christ in my life. So that has to translate. So the question is, what's the value of having conversations? And so the quote that's coming up to me is that not everything faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so while things are not as the way that I would like them to be, the fact that I actually can legally vote this year has been the result of a lot of conversation and lost lives, but there definitely has been progress because I can vote. I can think of a lot of privileges that I have that generations before me did not have. So I definitely think we've made progress, although not all the progress that is needed. And I don't want to, some people say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, but what I'm sitting with, I heard someone say, it's a relay. And so in this generation, what is the work that I am responsible to participate in so that the work moves forward in the next generation? I don't want the work to die in my generation because it will if we don't continue to engage in the conversation, and not just conversation, but action to ensure that the kingdom of God becomes a reality first in our own heart, and then a reality in the spaces that his people inhabit.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. That question of what is my work in my lifetime to move the conversation forward, not to solve the whole thing forever and ever. That gives me hope because sometimes it just feels so overwhelming. Nate, what would you say?
It's what we got.
Yeah.
I just as I'm listening, I want to broaden the definition a little bit because there's a conversation going on in our culture about issues all the time. It's in the media, it's in art, it's in music. And so we're interacting in the conversation one way or the other. I mean, now that's, a little abstract with that, but I found it to be really healing to have conversations. And I think on both sides. So yes, what Andre's statement of I've experienced racism, what's more times I can remember, but I haven't had a conversation. Like what I wouldn't want is for a person to, I wouldn't want him to feel obligated or like that he needs to, to do that. Because it's potentially going to just pick at scabs and, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask a couple more here and go to the live. Quite a few folks who submitted questions asked questions along the lines of, and this would maybe be somebody leading a group at a church or someone who's a pastor or somebody who's in charge of a group conversation. how to lead a conversation where people are at various stages of awareness or openness about racial injustice. So you can't sort of assume a common ground. If you had to lead, and maybe you do have context where you have to lead a conversation like that, do you have coaching?
I would lean on that courageous conversations. They have a protocol, and they have what they call a compass. And so it's this quadrant, believing, feeling, thinking, acting. And it's to help people understand that everybody's entering the conversation from a different place, and to own how you're entering into the conversation. So I think for group conversation, that resource, Courageous Conversations Around Race, has some really good tools to help people enter the conversation and some framework to care for a process. Yeah, I think that's, and then I use that in the combination of what Parker Palmer's Circle of Trust, sort of, the integrating the silence comes in, and the other tool is using a third object. So sometimes we're entering into a conversation and we start with where we are starting at, but often instead of talking about the actual issue in our particular experiences, we can put up a third thing. In our residency, Juanita showed the long shadow. So you have a third object that is providing the information to you, and people are responding to that, rather than each other. So those are some things I've found helpful for groups.
So let me explain that a little bit, because it's kind of neat how what Tina is referring to is when she was a student at the Renovar Institute, Juanita Rasmus, one of our faculty, came. She showed the film The Long Shadow, which is about the history of racism in America, slavery, particularly in America. And then, leaning on Parker Palmer's work, led a guided Circles of Trust exercise where people could share their reaction to the film, basically, and then the group would hold that in silence, and then the next person would share. And then, Tina, can you talk a little bit about, your eyes get big. I'm not going to ask anything scary. Can you share a little bit about how you've applied that experience and developed it for your work in corporate America? Because I think it's really interesting.
Well, The Long Shadow was a lengthy film.
Right.
It was not The Long Shadow, it was a long film too.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done that with a 3-minute clip from Martin Luther King, where he talks about riots are the language of the unheard. But I show the full clip where he talks about why he doesn't support or he doesn't believe that violence is the right strategy. But he also talks about how he understands how people get to that strategy when people refuse to listen. Mm-hmm. And so it's been really helpful, because in Minneapolis, we could do a Circle of Trust. Originally, it was a homogenous group of Asian Pacific Islander folks, Black African American. But then when we began to have mixed groups, that's a little more difficult, because our white counterparts were really focused on the vandalism and the burning buildings where people were grieving the murder of George Floyd. So that clip served as a way to give them something else to focus on, and it showed both sides, and so it just allowed people to respond to that and listen. And so that proved really helpful to move people forward from just, this is my position or that's my position, but to, there's more that I need to pay attention to. That makes sense?
Great. So you used the King clip as the third thing, and then the Circles of Trust, Parker Palmer kind of work to let people express what they were feeling and hold it for each other and attend to what their own reactions. Yeah, really helpful. And there was a question submitted about, can this be done online?
Yes, I've done it actually without video. I mean, it was, we showed the video clip, but they weren't seeing a video of each other like we are right now. It was audio conference, and it was effective.
Wonderful. Nate, anything you would add about helping groups into this?
I like all that. One of the things I've done is start with the ground rules, and just to kind of say, look, we're a group. This is our, we're a community in this room right now. What do we want the rules to be as we enter this conversation? And then just open it up. And inevitably, people say pretty much the same thing. Be respectful. Let's not attack people. Let's listen. And but what's good about that is they're now taking ownership of the process, and it's now their rules rather than me coming saying, all right, look, nobody be, act whatever. And really focusing on the community piece of it, right? We're together in this. And but that's maybe one little piece I'd add to it. Yeah.
I think my experience of both of you facilitating groups in I've had a little taste of Fellowship of the Burning Heart, the way that's structured, and a little taste of the work that Tina does. And there is a fair amount of structure to it. So that's a little different. We've spent a lot of our conversation today talking about kind of one-on-one relationships. How can I be a safe person to be with? How can I listen well? But in groups, would you coach people who are heading up a group to put some kind of structure in place for the group? Like, don't just give them some cupcakes and say, now go have a great talk about race. But like, we've talked about protocols, we've talked about structure. I guess I'm just trying to highlight that it seems like that's helpful in terms of creating these safe spaces. Do you want to push back on that, or just say, yeah, great gift for the obvious, Carolyn, or anything else you would say to that?
I say it's important, especially when there are new relationships and you may be able to do something more with groups that have established relationships. So, but it is definitely important to be thinking through, how do I want to care for the people in this that are coming together, and paying attention to how everyone's not in the same place. And I would think through, how will I care for the people that this is the first time? How will I care for the people that have done this many times? Yeah, so yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Anything you'd add, Nate? You good?
No, I think being directed with it is probably wise, and it gives an entry point. I mean, I don't know which one of you are saying it, but breaking into groups and then having a conversation that's kind of a softball question, it just starts things. And yeah, a kind of free for all. I don't know. I don't have a direction, and kind of goal seems to be probably the best way to go.
Yeah, that's good. A lot of people are asking about where can I find the clip and these protocols, and we'll get as much of that together. Monty is always behind the scenes writing down everything we say and then tracing it down from our panelists. So rest assured, we will share as much of what we've talked about as we possibly can. Let's ask a couple of these questions that have been submitted while we've been talking. Some of them were early on, so we may have answered them since, but I'll put them out there. An anonymous attendee says, a question I'm hearing a lot is, what is it exactly that people of color are asking us white folks to actually do at this time? I'm not sure it's the best question, but because I'm being asked it a lot, I thought I'd share it. So how would either of you answer that question if you care to?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. A question I'm hearing a lot is, what is it exactly that people of color are asking us white folks to actually do at this time?
Not be part of the problem?
I think I'm asking, and I have to be clear, I don't speak for all people of color, but from my perspective, I am asking people to care. I'm asking people to engage. I'm asking people to take action. And I'm asking people to have conversation in their communities. So I don't think there's this one thing. I'm asking for them to accept the invitations the Spirit is extending to them, to be willing to to join in that. I'm asking people to notice the presence of whiteness and how it is impacting each moment. You know, so just to really, you know, notice what's happening, because I think if you notice what's happening, it's likely the Spirit will give you some guidance in what to do about what you notice.
Mm-hmm. That's been a theme through this whole conversation, is asking the Spirit to show each of us what is invisible to us that needs to become visible. And then the rest kind of follows from there. Yeah. Once we see it, then we have to respond to it. Yeah, it's really good. We were asking for a little bit more clarity around the term, we were being asked for a little more clarity around the term social construct. So maybe our sociology prof, I don't know if are you actually a sociology prof? Social work prof.
I'm nothing now, so.
Well, anyways,
social work.
Professor Foster,
Yeah,
could you help us, either of you actually, could you help us with what we mean when we say social construct?
Do you want to take it, Tina?
I'll start, and then you can fill in all the holes. How we got this notion of race began with the anthropologist who said, I've been looking out on the world and I've decided there's some people that have these features and they're Negroid, and these people, they have these features and they are Mongoloid. And then we have these people and they are, is it Caucasoid, right? So he began grouping people and giving them labels, and then along with that became narratives to define those people. So Negroid, or people from Africa, they are not intelligent. They are all of these descriptors. And that was accepted as science, and that's how we categorize people by race. And what we know from data and research is that there really is no biological distinction between people by race. And so when I say that, when I'm saying race is a social construct, I am directly rejecting any assertion that there are genetic differences between people by race.
It's really helpful. Anything you'd add, Nate?
I think of it as a difference that we assign meaning to. So like, I mean, there's that kind of classic study where I'm forgetting the details of it, but the teacher says to the students, I think blue-eyed, brown eyes, and you know, brown-eyed people are good, blue-eyed people are bad, and then just turns them loose, and then the kids start turning. I mean, it becomes this like a war zone of sorts, because they've now made a social construct out of eye color. So I'm left-handed. That has no, meaning socially, but if we decided collectively as a society to put some meaning behind it, and then it becomes this kind of, I'd echo that, Tina's, much of the white supremacy that we are kind of integrated into society is, science was leading the charge on some of this in really, really destructive ways. And you don't have to go that far back in history to hear leading experts, that it is not true and by any stretch, but that was just, kind of part of that. And so it's, social constructs are kind of fun to work. It's a hard term, but it's kind of fun to begin to look at what are the meanings that we collectively prescribe. One, way to think of it is, I'm on a totally different piece, but maybe it'll tie in terms of sexuality. So, we in some cultures, the classic study of if someone walks in on a person taking a bath, what do they cover up? And in some cultures, it's just different. Some people cover their hair, cover their belly button, because they've socially constructed belly buttons to be sexual. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of different things that we've, as a society, mutually agreed on that they have meaning, but they really don't have meaning.
Mm-hmm. And so the social construct part of it is then we organize the society and decide who gets benefits or not. So in our country, we decided this social construct of race, and that's how we categorize you. And then we decide, you know, white landowners get to vote, and and if you're not a white landowner, you don't get those benefits. If you are of African descent, you're not counted as a person. You can hold no, right? So socially, we determine what is allowed for you. So that's the social construct of race for the purpose of categorizing people and allotting and distributing government resources. And that's what the conversation that people are trying to have. It's not an individual person, and you can be a bad person, but we also want to look at how we have constructed a society that distributes resources and creates outcomes that we're seeing everywhere, which has nothing to do with biology, but everything to do with a social construct that we've chosen.
Really helpful. We are out of time in a sec. Beforehand, Tina and I voted that Nate would pray the closing blessing on this.
You're welcome.
Yes,
You're welcome.
yes. Cannot thank each of you enough for being willing to have this conversation, for modeling a grace-drenched conversation so well, for leaning into the kingdom, believing that it's coming more and more and more. And so very, very grateful to each of you. Grateful to Monty behind the scenes and Justine, who we briefly got to see. and so grateful to each of you out there for joining us, for talking to each other in chat, for giving us great questions, for investing in this conversation. We love you. We're really grateful for you. And we know that the Spirit will continue to make invisible things visible to us. That's the incarnational life. So, Nate, can you seal this for us in prayer?
Sure. Might we have your mind, your heart on these issues? Would you guide us? Would you lead us? Would you show us our place, our role in this space, in the communities, in the families, the neighborhoods, and the systems that we're a part of actively and passively? How we desperately need your guidance, your help. Would you birth, Dean had said this before a call, and I just like it. Would you birth an invitation for each of us to our next step? Would you give us the courage, an enthusiasm, even a joy to continue to discover and learn how to love others well, how to interact with the systems and the mechanisms that we find ourselves in. Show us how we can respond well. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, friends. Blessings, everyone. Bye-bye.